I think,
just the history.
yeah, and I think that is something that we need to, as you said, in kind of a concise way, get that out in the general public.
This
And
becomes,
that's
if
what
I can use the term, one of these.
I think that's, that's one of the tasks that the staff is working on, trying to update the housing element, and the idea that we could use some of that information they're gathering, not only from the existing housing element, but anything they're doing to update it, that kind of becomes part of the discussion. But just, going back on that for a minute, just taking what's in the housing element now and trying to present it.
Well, you see, the problem I have with that is that, yes, the housing element as it stands today, it could be used as a boilerplate for exactly where we are, with a few exceptions. That is, unless your agenda is to change major A. Then, of course, you're writing an entirely different housing element than the one we have. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
depends
that's
on
why I made
who's
it.
writing the housing
Right.
element and what is the goal within the housing element that you're writing.
Right, I understand what you're saying, and maybe we take it to the point of saying the existing housing element, because there is this separate process
Yeah,
that's going
exactly
on
right.
that we're trying to, that's been somehow tried.
Right, because I would think the outcome of this form, and how it's handled by both the planning board and the city council will influence how that next housing element is written. That will be the influence on it, and that will be the thing that is deciding.
I would have in the past was saying that somehow what's in the housing element is some kind of objective thing that everybody agreed on while it was being written.
Yeah, I know.
It was a knock-down, dragged out, gun-toting practically flight. As a matter of fact, every time that Greg Cruz came out with another version, like Renewed Hope and the Sierra Club and Art Ecology were in up to the State Housing Community Development and sent in all of their objections to it. And then Greg Cruz, we have spent all this staff answering all of their objections. I have a book at home that's as thick as this, that is nothing, doesn't even include the housing element, it just includes all of the literature and arguments about the Measure A part of the housing element. And it literally is this thick. It went out for several years, and there's nothing objective about it. It created a huge schism in the city, and, which was a shame, because as long as Kathy Craigwell was deputy director out there, we're never gonna get a certified housing element. But the statements that they made, and again, I have enough to carry, so I didn't bring in something this size. But it's that much literature that is against the treatment of Measure A in the current housing element. So there's no such thing as a one side to what's in the housing element. And
But is it the case, though, that it is adopted city policy at this time?
Yes,
I
the housing
believe.
element is, yeah.
So, and if I can just, I'm trying to move us forward a little, if I could. I think I've heard these two pieces that several of you have suggested, and I think we're actually close on a consensus, at least that this one is an important piece to do first, and I think almost this is an important piece to do second, although there's less consensus about how this one would be done. I think,
we
can't see from here. What-
Sorry, I didn't hear the second one.
That's the Murphy lawsuit is what she referred to in her.
Okay.
No,
That's the
actually,
Murphy lawsuit, yeah, about Measure A when he sued way back when they did the
no.
settlement.
I think I might, this is a question, I think there are probably a lot of.
That's the one I thought you were talking
Yeah, no,
about,
I'm
the
thinking
Murphy
of the
one.
Guyton.
Oh, the Guyton
Big-
one.
I think there's more
Oh,
than
it's
one.
called Guyton?
Guyton.
There's the homeless collaborative.
The Homeless Collaborative one,
There's
is
the
that what you're talking about?
ecology suit.
Yeah, there's a lot of lawsuits.
We've done lots of lawsuits.
Which is probably why you need to hear from the city attorney's office for that part of the.
Okay, so,
What do we have to get into?
It's okay, I have my hand up.
Diane, go ahead.
They sued, they won,
I'm sorry,
Actually,
Tab, put that in.
I think, because I'm gonna flip back to about our ultimate forum, about how much time we want to allot for public speakers, which to me should be the majority of the time, for people to respond. But as far as any lawsuits go in, the city has been sued all kinds of time, and on the settlement in the Guyton case, that was 3 people who settled that. and there was a lot of us who really thought that that settlement was a real sellout. And also, that wasn't to the voters. And I think that we should forget about lawsuits and settlements, because one settlement is completely confidential. The others were done by 3 council people, and well, one of them was the mayor, I believe. We should stick to what's gone to the voters. The red brick building did go to the voters, and at that time, they were trying to say that it was on account of preservation. Well, you have to have a reason to throw over part of Measure A, and it has to be based on something that could not be applied anyplace else. And they said it was because it was a historical building. And then we said, well, yes, there's a lot of historical buildings here in town. You're gonna put condos in the Alameda Theater. That's on the historical list of Park Street. That went to the voters. The developers dumped in buku bucks. We had hardly peanuts, about 1/10 of what they had, and the voters still prevailed on it. The other thing that went to the voters is the 2,000 square foot limit to make sure that in case anything happened to Measure A, because that was Chuck Karika's real fear that something might happen to it. So he put in, which was on the ballot, the 2,000 square foot limit on the buildings.
Eureka's a former mayor.
And that was a separate ballot
Like
initiative?
two,
or was
like
it-
two Measure A votes.
Wow.
That was, and those went to the voters, so I think those are important because they were voted
No,
on.
up one, put, yeah.
But I don't think that we should get into any area of whoever sued anybody or any lawsuit.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think, and I'm not through on that. And as far as the other concern about developer or consultants, this PDC is like Barbara said, it's a concept. It was not adopted by anybody, and it was most of the information that Roma had. And I am familiar with other of Roma's work, and I always thought that they did a very good job, because they also did our area-wide study. And this one, when I read this Alameda Point, this concept, I thought Peter Pan and fairy dust. I mean, it was the most ridiculous concept based on a false premise that I'd ever seen. And it's not just on account of Measure A in here. It's the whole, what they started with an idea of something that is not feasible, and then built all of this other stuff around it. So
Living the theory.
this is one reason, and it just depends on who's talking to the consultants and where they get their information from. So I am just as skeptical of various consultants doing things the same way Barbara does.
Okay, so I'm not, I really would like to forestall the question of consultants, and I've certainly heard several of you say you don't think it's a good idea. Can we, though, come back to this question? I guess
Well,
I.
Willie can be a consultant, and that's kind of fine, because he's an Alameda person, and he knows the history. That's it.
Okay,
You're putting words in my mouth that I am banning consultants. I, for our set, would not pick one. If Marilyn and her colleagues want to pick consultants, go for it, Marilyn.
Okay, but Barbara, I need you to understand that there is not a consensus among the 6 of you to have a format where each side picks some speakers.
Well, it hasn't been turned down yet.
I'm trying to move us forward in having a discussion as to whether you even want to go there. What I've heard, the one piece I've heard, I thought that there was an emerging consensus on, would be that Woody Minor, I'll say it in particular, would give a presentation on some set of things that are considered history. And I think history goes beyond 1973 and maybe extends up to 1991 or 1995, is what people's idea of history is. And I think I'm hearing a consensus from all, I'm looking for anything we can agree on here. I think all 6 of you would be in agreement that starting the forum with a presentation on the history up through sometime in the 90s by Woody Minor is a good thing.
If we were voting, we would all vote yes, but since we're going to consensus, I think that is good.
Good, okay. So, and we might come back later and change it, but it's lovely.
No, you've accomplished that much.
It's lovely you've accomplished something, right?
Yes.
So we're gonna say agenda,
Let's cross out the settlement agreement.
and we're gonna say number 1, history.
He's redoing it.
Before you pass
$19.95 plus or
black.
minus.
Yeah.
Okay?
Go back to black, that's.
Just business.
That's too hard to read, okay.
I'm wondering if another thing we have consensus on is that there should be an opportunity for public input.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's a very important part of it.
I think it should be probably very much the bulk of the forum.
So we have to
Let her know.
decide how long this one.
Okay, well, I-
Yeah, I brought that up about an hour ago.
I maybe will be the only naysayer, but I feel like I have a fiduciary responsibility to say it. I've heard a couple of you say that you are concerned about not encouraging people to stake out positions and to develop camps. I do a lot of this kind of work, and I can tell you that the best way to get people wedded to their positions and to create camps is to have a bunch of people address a board in a town hall forum. So if your desire is to create dialogue, you can do that many other more effective ways, in small groups, in one-on-one.
I just clarify, you're saying rather than, no, you're not saying don't have public input, but you're saying just bringing people one by one up to the.
To the microphone, yes. I'm saying that in bringing people one by one up to the microphone is a very camp-creating way of gaining public input.
But people expect it.
I run a lot of meetings where we don't do it.
Okay, in Berkeley, they don't expect
I run
it.
these meetings throughout California.
That would be
Actually,
amazing.
I'd like to hear David finish, because I would like to hear examples of other ways. I think we may not be clear on what some other possibilities
And I'm here to facilitate you all, and I'm going to shut up as soon as unless somebody asks me. I said my piece. I will respond to Marilyn because she asked.
I'll be
So
answering.
tell us some other ways to incorporate public input into a
Okay.
forum without.
A way that we very commonly use is that we ask people, and please hear me out because you already interrupted once. We put people in small groups of 8 to 10 people. We purposely make sure that the groups have a mixture of points of view in them, so people are really listening to each other. Well, are hearing various points of view. What we find is that people working in small groups, as you all are today, although you have very differing points of view, will actually have very civil and intense discussions. That's actually pretty different from the way people are when they get up and they've got an audience and people are applauding and it's very heated. At the end of those small groups, we ask people, we don't necessarily come to any consensus. I think in this concept people generally wouldn't. But then either all or some, depending on the number of groups, of those small groups report back. So I'll give you an example. We did the visioning project for the city of Livermore. If you know anything about Livermore, it's also a heated community where there are a lot of different opinions, particularly on the issue of North Livermore and whether it should be developed. It's an open area today. It's rangeland and agriculture. The city has had it in its sphere of influence for a long time. It's thought about annexing it. The city is split pretty much 50% down the middle as to whether that land should be developed or not. We did not change that, but by having small groups, we had people, I think, more able to get a detailed understanding of the pros and cons and to respectfully discuss it. And then, at the end of that, in that case, we had 400 people attending these meetings, so 40 small groups. We didn't hear back from every small group, but we got reports from about 10 small groups, and I think everyone whose group was not reported came up to me afterwards, and many people said, I was really aware that several of the groups reported the same things that our group said. In the end, that process, although it didn't resolve the North Livermore issue, it did enable the city to come to consensus on a number of other items, including redevelopment of their downtown, some guidelines for appropriate housing types in the downtown, and the location of a future BART station in the city. So there was good progress made. It's a model.
I think you're talking down to us. We have had many forums where people have been broken up into small groups. You act as if we didn't know all about this. We do.
Barbara, in all due respect, I was answering Marilyn's question.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you can certainly say you have different opinions. I certainly didn't mean to speak down to you or anyone else. Marilyn did want to ask me
But I
about
would
this.
like some time after Marilyn finishes.
Marilyn, are you ready to?
Well, at some point, and maybe I'm jumping the gun, we certainly would want to cover some just basic housekeeping details. I put down who, what, when, and where, and who the various participants would be, topics to discuss. There's there's been some discussion, at least people, contacting some of the board members about when would a meeting be held? Would it be one meeting, would it be two, would it be a weeknight or a weekend day, to maximize opportunities to attend? And where would it be held? There's been some, there's been some interest voiced in someplace that would be accessible for local television programs. But I think we're still.
Yeah, I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah.
So I got number one, we agreed that there's gonna be a
Can
history
I answer
lesson.
the small forum? We have been there. We have had small forums in the Oak Club. There were several forums in the Oak Club. There were several forums out at Alameda Clayton Tower Building. There have been several forums. We've had these small group forums all over the place. And what happens is the most determined people turn out as many bodies as they can, so they dominate these small groups. And I see some people in the audience who've been there on one side or the other. And what happens, what comes out of the small groups is the opinion of the people who manage to dominate the small groups. And if you only have a limited supply of people, you can't get an equal number on both sides. And furthermore, as a council member and a person, I like to hear people come up to a microphone and tell me. Sometimes they tell me no, but I like to hear them say what they have to say. And then you hear what everybody has to say, and it's not filtered by anybody else or any system. And the direct communication from the people to their government, this purest First Amendment form, is so important to me that this idea of sticking it into some filter system, which is what the small forms turns out to be, the small group turns out to be. Let the people speak and be heard, and their opinions recorded and sent to council. And I saw small forums that I witnessed when I was on the council in Alameda turned out to be ways to muzzle certain elements in the city. And as a person who's always done the populace, I can't tell you how strongly I object to that. And if you keep trying to say, we don't want to produce a split in Alameda, there's already a split. There's a strong split. And if we're pretending it's not here, then the whole thing is based on quicksand. I don't want to prevent anybody from getting to the mic and saying what they want to say. And having it recorded, and we had a forum in the planning board ran a forum in 2002, which went on in the morning and the afternoon. And the problem is that nobody recorded what the people had to say. And we've got a one-page thing. And what we need, one of the things the council was very clear on is they wanted to full report back on all the public comments as well as what was said. And so my reaction, having watched the small group concept operate in Alameda, is that it prevented people, it took away the First Amendment rights from people. And
Okay. So Barbara, you've clearly stated that opinion, and I know you had your hand up.
I have one more question. Have you ever tried to sort of flip it, where people, let's say we agreed on some experts, whether it's 2 experts or 1 on each subject. Have you ever had it done where people actually present their comments first or pose questions to the experts and then they discuss them in sort of a way? I think what we do now is, an expert says something and everybody gets up and says, and there's no way to conclude or bring it back or allow the public input to impact the discussion. I think is what you're saying. You have the discussion and then it just never goes anywhere. But is there a way to flip it so the public speaks and asks questions and says things, and then the experts talk about what they heard and whether it's that's their experience
I agree, there is a way.
based on their expertise and
Barb wants to say
Yeah,
something
there is a
about
way,
that.
because after the speakers, whoever
so are you agreeing that maybe there is a way to have the
Absolutely.
public pose the questions and
Absolutely.
the comments, and then the
Right.
experts?
They could make a
Marilyn would really like to talk, but I guess the one thing I caution about that is that I think that if you've got a set of people up there who are panelists, that their time is gonna be potentially a little more limited in some way than, say, a board whose job is to hear all the public. So you may not, I mean, I imagine that if you open this up to all comers and have a podium and particular people can talk as long as they want, you may have 5 or 6
Not
hours.
as long as I want.
Well, I can imagine even if you limit time, you may have 5 or 6 hours of comment. I don't know, so, well, in response to Ann's question, I'm thinking that and that's just comment. If the panelists discussed every one of those comments as they came on, you may be at 12 hours. And I don't know if you can get a panel to sit there and discuss for 12 hours, but I think you could do some combination.
I'm not saying
If I could make a suggestion, I like that idea, and I might take it a step farther, and David, maybe you have some experience. Is there some way that we could publicly solicit questions that the public has about Measure A, its implications, its application, its history, and get it, and I would suspect, because just taking notes at planning board meetings, there do seem to be continuing or recurring themes, but get those questions or those themes to the panelists or whomever ahead of time so that they have time to actually do some thinking and prepare an answers and address those issues. I mean, there may still be things that come up at the meeting, but maybe a little advanced surveying of in some way. And then I just want to go back to the idea of small group versus individuals to the mic. I also wonder whether there might be a way to do both, because my concern, and I'm concerned with the First Amendment and with democracy too, as I know we all are, is that I think democracy works best when you get a majority of people to come and express their views, but there are some people who would be put off even by the tone of the discussion around this table today. There are some people, we all have differing sensibilities, and so if you can create something that's considered non-threatening for some, other people are perfectly comfortable standing up alone to the microphone, we, I think, could hear more divergent views from the community and get better input.
It's called writing. People submit written comments.
I agree, some people are uncomfortable speaking in public, etc. You can only accommodate so many people who have so many problems, or so many limitations. I do agree with Ann in the sense that it's often a problem at planning board meetings and city council meetings that the experts speak after the public speakers give the report, or the other way around, and then the public never has an opportunity to either challenge that report by the so-called staff member or expert. They never have an opportunity to say, well, you know, you were wrong about this point or that point. So I agree with you in that sense, that if in fact you're going to have so-called experts, then the public should be able to question their point of view or question their position. I also think if that's the avenue that's taken, then we have to say, if they were outside consultants, so to speak, they wouldn't have at their fingertips the information that perhaps some of the people would be interested in hearing. So one would suppose then you would have a panel which would be made up of this board or this ad hoc committee and staff members that could answer all of those questions by any public speaker if they had a question. I don't agree that small groups, and I've done that sort of thing in the past when I've done symposiums, is breaking up in small groups, and I agree with you, it's effective in some situations. This is not one of those situations, in my opinion, because I think what happens in those small groups, they're very nice and they're very kind and they're very gentle, but they really never get to the heart of the problem, nor do they come up with, in this case, we need a recommendation or a solution, so to speak. So I think the public input and the questioning of a panel of some sort is the way to get to the heart of the problem, because the outcome of this, for the planning board to make a recommendation to the city council, is reality secondary to the fact of, from Rebecca's point of view, educating the people, from my point of view, getting information together to allow the city staff to write a housing element and dealing with transportation that is in line with what the community wants. The opinion that will be created out of all of this process. And I think the way you do that is not in small feel-good groups, but in groups where people openly express themselves, and if they don't wish to speak publicly, they can submit their written proposal or their written point of view, and have a staff member or somebody else read that position for that person. So if we want to get to a consensus here, more than, my vacation time, I think we need to say that, yes, we want to do the history, and then agree that we want to create some sort of a panel or some sort of a method based on Ann's idea that the public has an opportunity to question that point of view. Am I correct in that? And I think that's where we go with this, is that we say it's going to be open for public comment, and based on what Marilyn said, where, when, and how long are the three most important things in all of this, so we can then form the rest of this around that core. Because if we don't know how long, and we don't know where, it's awfully hard to put together the rest of it. Are we going to say it's going to be at Kaufman Auditorium, or is it going to be at City Hall Chamber?
Little theater.
So, or the little theater. So that's what I'm saying, that we need
I
to
feel
build
pretty
that.
strongly as a facilitator that we really should focus on the content. And then we can come back to when and how long and those things.
Well,
Rebecca, you're.
excuse me, one thing on that. If we don't know how long, it's awfully hard to figure out the content. I mean, are we talking about a forum that's going to run 3 hours, 4 hours, or 5 hours? Are we talking about a forum where we have, based on Barbara's model, we have 4 speakers who present for 15 or 20 minutes, and then Woody Miner's show, in my memory, is 45 minutes long. So we have a 2-hour presentation, and the rest of it is devoted to the public. What kind of model are we talking about? That's my question.
Well, I think
I mean, for the time.
I don't think there's an answer to your question about length of time, but I think there is an answer to your question about model. I think what you've all agreed to is history first. I think you're all agreeing there needs to be some method to talk about what Measure A means today and some of the both limitations and benefits. I don't think we have agreement of how to do that. I've got my red pen that no one can read, but I think there's a number 2 of limits and benefits. And I'm doing this because I don't want to mess up my writing of what we've agreed to. And then there's a number 3, which is some sort of public input. And I don't think you all have agreed on what this limits and benefits discussion is or on the public input. But I think you've agreed that it goes in roughly this order, and there may be, this limits and benefits may be with some sort of Q&A or discussion following up on what Ann said.
Which directly relating to the public input.
Well, Ann was suggesting, I think, even separate from public input or as a part of the public input, that if there are panelists, that the public might ask questions of the panelists.
Yeah, I think where I feel like we're at, and is we did have a whole series of types of workshops we broke into groups. We had those for Alameda Point, we had those for different issues associated with transit and everything. And I actually think that what we're doing here is kind of a culmination of that. And I think what came out of that was people realized they had a lot of questions about Measure A. What does it mean? How does it constrain us? How does it protect us? There's just a lot of questions. And now we're getting at, well, how do we get those questions answered in as objective and real fashion as we can?
So that would be the point of your Q&A discussion pieces, that you get some group of people, we don't know who make a series of presentations, and then if I'm a resident and I really want to know, well, does this keep us from having enough parks? I could ask that question and I get four opinions from the 4 panelists.
I don't know how many, maybe it's 2. I don't know whether it's 2, I don't know whether it's 4, I don't know, but so we get towards more objective and quantifiable answers. Because I'm actually not opposed to this notion of expertise. I think if we're sick, we go to a doctor that has, training and experience in what we're sick with, and we may get a second opinion if we don't agree with them, but we go there. If we have financial issues, we go to specialists in finances, and we get their opinion, and then we decide. And I don't see why, if we have questions about our future, we don't go to specialists in planning for the future and ask them some questions, and then decide as a community whether we want to go that way or not. It doesn't seem to me that we should hide from getting information.
Rebecca, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go back to the idea that one of my original intents again was to share information. And I think we're starting to get that with the first part. I think there's a little bit more of a component to that. But one of the things that concerns me is that it wasn't specific, well, I think it is written here, I can't quite find it, that we're not supposed to be advocating one way or another for Measure A. And it seems like and I absolutely think we need to have public input, but what is the question we're asking, or what is it? I mean, it kind of goes back to what Pat said, that maybe it's not really saying, do we keep Measure A, do we get rid of Measure A? It's more, what do we want this community to look like, and how does that help us shape the transportation and housing elements as they evolve? Because I think we're kind of, somehow we've been moving towards, saying we need people to be able to get up and advocate for one side or another, and I know, and you're absolutely right that, people do have strongly held opinions about it, but is that really the results? Do we want to what do we want to report back to City Council, that people have strongly held opinions and these are the ones that agree and these don't? Yeah, everybody knows that. So
That's
so
why
let me just
disagree
say,
with you.
so isn't it really more to get us to move towards the future? What is it that collectively we want that will help this community in terms of developing the next iteration of their transportation and housing element? And the Measure A is
Diane's
just
had her hand
fundamental
up for a
to
while.
that.
Nothing is ever going to be settled, because it's not a question of do we keep Measure A or get rid of Measure A. That's not the question. And it's not what we're here for. The only way that Measure A will be changed, and that is if somebody wants to get out there and waste the shoe leather to get the amount of signatures to put it on a ballot. The council's not gonna do it, and so that's a moot question. So it's a total moot question. It's even a moot question of whether or not you think you can make an exemption for just one part of town in Measure A. Because even if you want to make an exemption, you're gonna have to waste a bunch of shoe leather out there and have a following, and people will willing to sign on the dotted line for you. So I think that it'd be better just to back off from that, get back to our original charge, which is more of an educational one and answering people's questions, which needs to be done in the context that I believe that they said to maybe make any clarification for the housing element. But as far as I'm concerned about the housing element, Kathy has a perfectly good boilerplate right here. That word has been used before. I believe Pat used it. And that's my total consensus. All you have to do is update the figures on it, and you've got the housing element.
Marilyn.
And the other thing about this question of do you ask questions here or do you speak here? I would think that if somebody was doing a presentation, whether they're a layperson or quote-unquote expert, and really, you don't really always go to experts because experts aren't what this town is about. What this town is about is community, and it's what the people want in this town. And you don't get any expert to get the pulse of the people in this town unless you talk to them. So to me, if it came to a point, because of the public part, they should be able to get up, make a statement. They should be able to submit something in writing that they want for the council. Or if they have a particular question, they could ask it of someone. All of the above. What's wrong with that?
Marilyn.
So just going back to the charge that we've been given on the back of our agenda, part of the forum on Measure A is a discussion of the Measure A benefits and the Measure A limitations. And so I think I really second what Rebecca had to say about sharing information in a constructive, useful way. I mean, let's look at the benefits of Measure A. I know they're out there. Just as an example, somebody had objected to that handout that came out of the MTC forum that had all the nice photographs of the non-Measure A compliant buildings like Stonehenge and whatnot. And someone made the comment somewhere along the line of, well, yeah, but none of these pictures showed the downside, some of the really ugly buildings, and I think that's a good point. I mean, what are the kinds of things you would want to avoid if you're looking at, you know, the limitations of Measure A, just as an example. As far as bringing in opinions from outside and so-called expert opinions, an example that's near and dear to my heart is this building that we're sitting in, and I was on the library building team, and since we hadn't built a library in Alameda, at least a main library, since 1902, and things had changed a little since Mr. Carnegie, you know, gave us the money back then, we interviewed a lot of architects, we talked to consultants, we went on field trips, we looked at pictures and presentations to come up with the best that we could afford. It was a public project to build this new library. So it's okay sometimes to look outside our island perimeter, and with the understanding that you don't have to embrace all of what you learn either. You can pick and choose the best. I mean, it's not to say that there aren't ways we can improve upon what we already have.
Well, so I guess I'm hearing some repetition, if I can be so bold to say, the points that have been made. It seems to me, I'm going to, again, go out on a limb here, it seems to me that the only way we're going to move forward on this part of the meeting is to agree that several sides, for lack of a better word, would get to appoint a couple people to make presentations. And one group, you know, I'm hearing Marilyn say this most strongly, might say, I'd like to invite some outside experts in one way or another to make some presentations. And one group might say, I only want people who live in Alameda to talk about this, and those are the people I'm going to invite. But it sounds to me, and I do want to say, I'm not sure planning board members are the appropriate people to be one of those two sides. As I understand it, it's the planning board's job in this whole thing is to gather information and to remain neutral. But I believe there's a group called Homes, is that right, who has an interest in seeing additional housing built. There's obviously the appellants who have a strong interest in seeing Measure A not changed at all. And one might ask those two groups or something like that to put together a number of speakers who would be given an allotment of time who could then speak. I'm just, having heard you all talk about this several times, I'm not sure there's any other way to sort of to address this item. Barb, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree, and that was almost my original suggestion, and once again, I'm emphasizing, I'm not the least bit interested in telling the other side, or the three planning board members, who they should pick. I'm cheering them on. If they want to, I don't agree. I mean, for instance, this is housing element affordable. And if I talk to somebody about politics, I don't go to Don But, I mean, you know, it has no relationship between that and going to the doctor when you're sick. So, I'm not trying to censor what the three planning boards, who they want as their speakers.
Well, again, I want to be clear that I personally don't think the planning board is the group that would
Well, I mean, the three
choose.
people here.
Well, I don't think that the 6 people who are here are necessarily the people who would choose speakers at all. I think that's an open question, but I'm going to say, again, I'm going out on a limb, I'm a little beyond my facilitator role. I would very much urge you not to have the planning board try and appoint speakers on one side or another.
Well, my point was the 6 people here would agree that 3 of them would pick one set of speakers and 3 of them would pick another.
Okay, I think that's a proposal. I have a lot of concern about it.
I have a concern because it plays into that whole labeling of which side you're on, which I don't feel like I'm on any side. I have. Yeah. So I think it's fair to say that I want to look at it. I have questions about it. I think that there probably are some benefits and some limits. I want to be able to talk about that. Have to look at it. So I think that I would, you know, if it.
Is there a group that's outside the planning board that's clearly articulated the position that Measure A should be reconsidered?
Well, that would be Homes.
Homes, yeah.
That would be
But
Homes,
that is-
archaeology.
They are not part of this group, and don't even go there. Don't
Well,
even go
I'm
there.
asking, because I think the appellants who are, the 3 of you who are here today, are clearly here because you've staked out a clear position opposing any change to Measure A. The planning board does not have a position one way or another on this. And I don't think that we could ask the planning board to put together the other side of a sort of pro and con discussion. Marilyn?
Well, what I would like, and we do have to come back with a recommendation to the planning board, is to perhaps identify some themes that we think should be covered in this discussion.
In this, what I have as number 2.
The number 2 of, again, preservation and even increasing open space. We talk a lot about access to the shoreline and how we can keep that. I mean, there's a whole list of ideas.
So Marilyn, what you're suggesting is that we might list I'm doing this in the wrong order, but what people have stated in the past are some of the limitations and benefits, and then see if we can figure out speakers who could speak to them.
And if I could, that gets into some labeling too, which I know has to come eventually because it's on the charge, but maybe we could look at some of the global themes and see where there are benefits to structure. This is just my suggestion. Some of the topics that come up in a discussion of Measure A's limitations.
I thought we were going to do that in this particular
Well, I
workshop.
think what Marilyn's doing
We're
is,
not going to discuss.
what Marilyn's doing is not trying to make a point
We're
about them,
not.
but just to say these are things we would cover under number 2.
I'm just giving you themes. I'm not.
Well, I'll give you my theme after she
So
gives you
Pat,
her theme.
hear me out. Just historic preservation, economic development, transportation. Transportation, open space. Environmental cleanup. Housing density, I think there's not necessarily a lot of clarity on what exactly does density mean, maybe even a definitional discussion. And what I call livability, walkability of a community.
Thank you.
I use the word walkability all the time.
Okay, and housing variety.
And then about that and that traffic and overcrowding.
Well, you've got transportation
Yeah.
here.
It's like
Traffic,
traffic.
don't have to have an impact traffic.
Congestion.
Well, actually, it seems like there are some kind of broad topics here: economic development, transportation, housing maybe, and some of these other things, and maybe open space that actually fall underneath those.
But Marilyn, if I can be simple to say it, when I look at this list, the concern I have is that I think on every one of these, there are going to be varying opinions about what Measure A's implications are. I don't think there's any way that you could find one or several panelists who could present on these items and give a presentation that all 6 of you would agree, or 6 of you plus the homes people to widen the net. I don't think anyone could agree, could present on these topics in a way that all of you would say, yes, I agree that those are the implications of Measure A with regard to each of these items.
So,
Isn't that
one
a
thing,
real-
what does environmental cleanup have to do with Measure A? I'm curious about that.
Well, in terms of where you might locate clusters of homes.
Well, in terms of that having to do with Measure A, it
Then
has
we-
nothing to do with
you know
Measure A
what?
until you
I don't
have
want to get into
environmental
the
cleanup.
substance of it.
Yeah,
Or
I think this is it's a very interesting list of topics that might be covered under this number 2, but I still can't find a way around the notion that somehow you all, I mean, maybe a way to do this is that, I mean, we're maybe not going to finish today. Maybe all of you should try and think of individual people who should be on this panel, and we'll come back at the next meeting and just try and discuss them and choose the people by name, and that gets out of the question of various sides choosing people. But I think what I'm trying to find right now, I'm focusing on this question in my own mind of what would be the way to create a balanced panel to address these issues.
Certainly not that way.
And I think particularly seeing this list, what I see is there's just no way that 6 of you or 10 of you, if we expand the net, would agree on 1 or 2 speakers who would cover all these things and do it in a way you thought objectively. We've got to find a way that you all can either choose a variety of people together or have 2 or 3 groups that each get to choose a couple of people in order to get this covered in a way that will feel fair to all of us. Barbara?
Now, I think the word, the 500-pound gorilla sitting here is the word trust. And, that's why I think that the different points of view should be allowed to pick speakers to present their points of view. For example, would you raise your hand and ask to go to the lead?
I'm sorry, it's really gotten late, hasn't it? We should take a break. Could I suggest, since Diane's had to get up, that why don't we let Barbara speak and then maybe we'll take a short break?
I mean, for instance, there are all kinds of issues from the PDC. There's the alluvial soil problem, which means that all of the buildings in here are gonna have to be moved, either destroyed or moved and replaced. That includes the DEQ and the BOQ, which are subject to dissension. It includes a lot of the historic core. There's also floodplain problems out there. In other words, and we don't even know what condition the buildings are in, because the Navy built no known building code, which we have discovered to our distress as we go building on building. So, there really are too many topics to be covered in the forum that would only last one day, but one day is pretty, we had an all-day session on Saturday in 2002. That's why I say, let the planning board members come up with speakers that they think will cover these, if that's what they want to cover, that's okay. And let the 3 appellants pick some speakers. And I can see each side getting 2 speakers, and we have what you was saying at the beginning. And what's wrong with that? I mean, you want to do education, fine. I think we'll be doing education too. I've never seen in any of these presentations photographs and diagrams of measuring compliant housing. That's education that has never appeared in any of these, but it's education. And if they want to show pictures of Santana Row or the Fruitvale Bar Station or whatever, that's okay with me. I'm just saying that we're not, the thing that we're gonna get to agree on what can be said at that meeting is just not gonna happen. And so I wish them well on the speakers and the topics they wish to bring up. I'm just saying, give me appellants the right to pick
Should
up.
we take a short break perhaps, and then we'll, you want to say one quick thing?
Yeah, well, why not solicit from the public? I mean, we have lots of interested people who called for this forum or not. Why not solicit from the public, people who they would like us to consider to speak at this event? And it would represent, maybe homes, it would represent other interests, historic preservation and all, and then we as a panel review that and try to see if we can come up.
If we
You
do
don't
that,
put those
we're
2
gonna
on
have to
any
have another
before.
meeting.
Excuse me, I'm trying to like just say, we've got a list of issues.
Right.
We could solicit public input into people that they know would be qualified, what those qualifications are, and agreeable to come and speak on the panel, and then we can try to work with the team to make sure that there's a variety of interests, because I don't think it's pro or con. I think some people just want information so that they can decide whether they should be pro or con, or parts of it. And so I just think, we need to look to a broader, we can ask by the public, have a forum.
As Diane suggested, that would require another meeting. You would
I'm
be
fine with that. Let's do it.
putting a request out today, getting names, we choose it.
Okay.
Tuesday. Right. Okay, so that's an idea, I love ending before break with a positive idea on the table. Let's stop there and come back at 3:05.
Okay.
3 minutes.